dishes I get a lot of questions about are veggie burgers. And I think with the ubiquitous number out there that, it can be a confusing topic. For this, we're going to focus on just creating a really delicious dish that highlights a lot of different vegetables, some healthy fats from nuts, whole grains. It's not meant in any way to trick someone into thinking it's a beef burger. It's really meant to just be a delicious dish in its own right and celebrate the ingredients in it. You can make this in a whole variety of ways. I'm going to show you some examples of some ingredients, but if you take a look at the recipe, you can see that there's a lot left to interpretation. So there is the option to use whatever kind of nuts you want or whatever kind of binder you want, like whole grain breadcrumbs or oats or flax. I'll use a mixture of those. You can use whatever vegetables you want. The trick is really just to cook out as much liquid as you can. Where most people run into trouble making veggie burgers is just making them too wet so they fall apart. So I'll make sure to highlight some tips to prevent that. And we'll go ahead and also use some different spices and seasonings, so you can modify those to whatever you like. Some people might use, lentils and some paprika, and just to make kind of like an umami, but not stand out any particular flavor in their veggie burgers. Other people might want a strongly, sweet potato, black bean burger with, some Latin style seasonings. You can modify this however you like. And I encourage you to try a few different variations, and also to think of it as a way to use up what's in your fridge that needs to be used up. It also highlights a lot of whole grains and beans that we've covered in the Creating Healthy Bowls class. And I hope that you can see how this dish draws together a lot of techniques we've learned elsewhere. It is a very involved dish, so it's not something that a lot of people will do on a regular basis, but I think it is fun to kind of see how these things are made behind the scenes. And certainly I think you'll enjoy them either as a burger, or the other way I like to serve these is just making them into a falafel sized ball, and then you can put them on those bowls or salads like we've discussed. You can have them in a whole grain pita with some of the hummus that we made in another recipe, with lots of fresh shredded veggies. And I think if you're going to go to the trouble to make these, I would highly encourage you to make a bigger batch and then freeze them and use them again later. If you're going to do that, cook them first, so make them fully cooked, and then cool them off completely, and then pack them between layers of parchment and put them in an airtight container or bag and freeze them. You just want to defrost, which you can do in the microwave before you heat them up, and you can reheat either in the oven or just in a nonstick skillet. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with cooking our veggie burgers or patties. The first step is just to heat our pan. So you'll see this is very reminiscent of our saute class. And so once the pan is warm, I'll just go ahead and add a little bit of olive oil. And as we've mentioned in other sessions, if you prefer to cook without oil, you can just use stock, but use double the amount of volume that's listed for the oil. I think it adds some nice richness, so I'm going to use it in this dish. And just coat the pan. Because I'm not using a lot, I do like to use a nonstick pan. It's kind of, a happy medium between using a lot and using a little. If you were to try and cook all of this in a regular pan, you would need to use a little bit more oil to make it not stick. And once there's a little shimmering in the oil here, which we're just about there, I'll go ahead and add my aromatics, which are some minced garlic and some small diced onion. Okay. And so you can use, anything that's not going to scratch the pan. You can use a spatula, you can use a nylon pancake turner type of spatula. I really like the nylon fish type spatulas, which I'll show you in another session. And also saute, tossing. And so the goal in cooking all the vegetables that we'll include in the veggie burgers is really just to get out as much moisture as possible. One thing that I like to do is, instead of adding all these vegetables fresh like we will for this recipe, this is a great way to use leftover roasted vegetables. So roasted vegetables usually have a lot of the moisture cooked out of them. So just chopping them up fine, putting them in, or even adding them to the step that we'll get to later, which is processing everything into a burger consistency, like a raw meat consistency. Then we'll form our patty, so you can just add it at that point, and it will actually save a lot of time in the cooking process, because we're going to cook low and slow here to get out a lot of that moisture. If you notice that you have a lot of moisture in chopping your vegetables for this recipe, you can actually put them in a cheesecloth and squeeze them out, or just squeeze them by hand to wring out any excess moisture before starting to cook as well. To draw out moisture more quickly, you can also season at various stages with some salt. I'm going to add the other vegetables I have to make up about 2 cups total of vegetables. Just as soon as one starts to get warm, I'll add the other. I just don't want to cool the pan down too much. I have some cremini mushrooms I added a moment ago, and now I'm adding some chopped up broccoli. And as I mentioned at the outset, you can use a variety of different vegetables. I'm using a mixture because I don't want any one flavor to stand out a lot, but say if you wanted a black bean sweet potato burger, you could just use 2 cups of pre-roasted sweet potatoes. It would be great in here with some black beans. It's a really nice flavor. I find that's just a really common type that you can get a lot of different places, so I'm just trying to make something different that I couldn't just go out and buy, either at the store or at a restaurant. I added some finely shredded carrots. Yours don't have to be as finely shredded, it just helps cook the liquid out more quickly, and it helps you to not just get a big bite of carrot. If you like a big bite of carrot, that's totally fine. You can cut it up bigger and have a more obvious carrot in there. And then just for fun, I have some finely shredded beets as well. I don't necessarily want a lot of sweetness or a lot of beet flavor, but if you want a little bit of a pink color, you can use the beets, and it does give it that color. So, but again, I'm not really trying to replicate a beef burger, so it's not that important to use something that's going to give it a pink color. So during this whole cooking process, I'm just moderating the heat. I want to make sure to get as much water to release as possible, but don't want to burn the vegetables. And adding those little pinches of salt here and there will also help some of that liquid to be released. You can also, to save time, chop all these vegetables up in the food processor. I know you didn't get to see the behind the scenes mise en place or prep, but it can be done either way. You can put everything in the food processor and chop it up, to a similar size, or like what we had done here is there's some vegetables that would take longer to cook, like carrots, so they're shredded up smaller. Broccoli cooks more quickly, so it can be in slightly bigger pieces, and it will all cook at the same rate. And starting out with these fairly small pieces, it does take about 10 minutes to get all of the water released from the vegetables. And a lot of times in cooking I'll say, don't be fussy and keep messing with something, but it's actually helpful to stir this frequently, because as you stir, you can see steam rising up from the pan, and so it allows the steam to just be released more quickly if I keep stirring it. I wish you could smell this. It smells really good. Even if you're making varying types of vegetables in here, I would encourage you to at least use some mushroom if you want like a meaty umami flavor. So umami or meatiness in food is common in mushrooms, it's common in things like Parmesan cheese, tomato products. So I'm not using it this time, but if I want it to be really meaty in flavor, I'll also, at the end of cooking the vegetables, will add about a tablespoon of tomato paste, and then cook it until I get a good browning without burning it, and that does add a lot of umami or meaty flavor as well. So while we're waiting for some of this to cook, I did grab a couple of other things I just wanted to share with you in case you really want to amplify the meatiness or savoriness in this dish. So once the patties are made, you can add a couple of things. So it doesn't matter what brand you use, but I have a Worcestershire sauce. If you're vegetarian or vegan, there are different brands available that don't have any fish. The standard type that most people will see in most markets does have anchovies or fish in it. And then there's something called liquid smoke, which is just a smoky flavor, and it's really strong. A little goes a long way. So what I do is I will just mix a couple tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce with a few drops of the liquid smoke, and then at the end, or while it's cooking, where you might baste meat or something when it's cooking, I'll take a brush, just, you know, a paintbrush that's dedicated for food, and just brush that on, and that will give it kind of a browning color as well, and it will also add a lot of meatiness or savoriness. There's a fair amount of salt in those ingredients as well, so you want to be careful not to end up with a very salty dish by making sure to think ahead and not over salt the patties themselves if you're going to use that. We're getting there with our vegetables. They're about 2/3 of the way cooked. There's not too much liquid coming off. You can see the steam is less when I stir than it was when we started out. But there's still definitely a fair amount there, so we'll keep cooking for a bit. Okay, so it's been about 10 minutes. We're just finishing up the saute step. Like I said, you can see that takes some time. You really cut out most of this cooking time if you do those roasted vegetables instead of the steps. So you'll realize that the rest of it, is, other than measuring out a lot of ingredients, is fairly quick. I'm going to turn off the heat. If you were going to add that tomato paste to get that, you know, umami flavor, I usually would just make a space in the middle of the pan, add it here, and then just move it around. It will brown pretty quickly on a medium to high heat, and then use the residual moisture from the vegetables here to scrape it off the pan, and then put that along with these veggies into the food processor. I recommend a food processor and not a blender. You could also chop everything fine and just mix it together in a mixing bowl if you don't have a food processor. Okay. And now you just add the other ingredients. So you can use any type of bean or lentil. I'm just going to use some cooked brown lentils. You can cook them yourself, or you can drain and rinse a can of cooked beans or lentils. And then, because I feel like they blend in well and don't add a particular flavor of a certain nut to, you know, that stands out among the other ingredients and just adds to like a meaty flavor, I like to add crushed walnuts. They can be toasted or raw, it doesn't matter. And then I'm using some short grain brown rice. The reason I like this in particular is that it is kind of chewy, you know, compared to long grain brown rice, there's a little bit more chew. And so you have that texture you're looking for in a burger. You know, you don't want it mushy, you want it to kind of bite back a little bit. So I have a cup of brown rice. And then for flavoring, I have some parsley and some scallions, a mix of the two. I'll put those in. You can use any herbs or, you know, scallions that you like. You can add, you know, more onion earlier in the process as well if you don't have any fresh that you want to use. And then there are a variety of options for binders. So you just want something that's going to hold this together, especially if you're wanting to grill it on the grill. You want this to be not too wet and to hold together. So in many burgers that you would make at home that are, you know, veggie or other burgers or meatloaf, things like that, there's usually egg to bind it together. You could certainly use that here just to make this totally plant-based, since it's otherwise, you know, a great plant-based high protein option. I'm going to add some flaxseed, ground up flax seeds. I wouldn't use whole. It will be, you know, it would be strange to find seeds in the middle of your burger. And then I have some uncooked oatmeal, and this is instant oats. You could either use instant or ground up rolled oats. I wouldn't use steel cut oats. They won't cook well in here, so it'll just, you know, you'll be breaking your teeth on that. You don't want to do that. So flax absorbs a lot. If you find that your first time doing this, it's too dry, you can, you know, keep adding water, but you can never take it away. So I'm just doing it dry. A lot of recipes you'll see if you look online, it'll say make a flax egg, you know, add water and flax together. I find that they often end up too wet when you do that, so I start out with just the dry flax seeds. Seasonings are really, you know, spices, herbs that are dried are really up to you. I'm going to add a combination of smoked paprika. I like that smoky flavor. A little bit of chili powder. This is just ground chilies, but it could also be, in which I'm using a mild one, so it's not too spicy for people that don't like it very spicy. You could also use the chili powder that's a mix of cumin and garlic and chilies that you would use for the chili type soup. And then I have a salt-free herb mix. I know I mentioned this a few times throughout the course and just wanted to show you that there are, you know, probably 50 different kinds of salt-free seasoning mixes at the store that are usually a combination of dried herbs, spices, fruits, vegetables, things like that. So, you know, I encourage you to try out a few that you find at your local market and see what you like. It's always nice to have those on hand. Just getting used to incorporating them into dishes can help you reduce how much salt you feel like you need in a dish. Put that in. Just also has, this one has a great flavor, so I like that one. And then some black pepper, And then a little bit of salt. This is not great totally salt-free. If you go and look at the packages in the freezer section or the refrigerator section at your market, you'll see that many, especially the meat replacement burgers, are super high in sodium. So the amount that we're adding here is really, small potatoes compared to what you're going to find at the market. And since there's nothing in here that's dangerous to eat raw, I'd also encourage you to taste the texture is raw is something to be desired, but just taste just for salt before you go to cook the patties, and then maybe make a small test patty and again taste to see if you like the seasoning before you make the whole batch is another good tip I would recommend. Especially since you might use different ingredients every time, things are just going to vary each time you make this. And I do want there to be some texture, so we're really going for the same amount of chunkiness as ground beef would be, even though again we're not trying to replicate a burger, but we don't want it to be a paste or too smooth. So I'll use the pulse function on my food processor. We'll stop and scrape this down too, just so I don't overmix it while I'm waiting for everything to get combined. It's actually so surprising. It smells delicious, and it's not even cooked yet. So I wish I could transfer the smell to you. And if you want bigger chunks of certain things in there, you could always keep that off to the side and just stir it in afterwards. I kind of want mine mixed together and more uniform. The less bigger chunks you have in there, the better it's going to hold together when you try to cook it. Yeah, I think that's where I'm going to leave it. So you can see in there that you can see there's one stubborn little piece of walnut in there that wasn't going to get mixed in, but you can see a few little flecks of meat, a few little flecks of herbs, and grain of rice, but a lot of it's pretty well incorporated, and that's just about right. And then the next step, we're going to make this into patties. Got a few more things out of my workstation, so I have a bowl to transfer the veggie patty mixture to, and then I have a container with some water just to help clean my hands. Having a towel is handy, I have that below, and then I have a sheet pan lined with some parchment paper. This will help it to not stick, and you can reuse that when you go to freeze it if you want. So just put this into the bowl. Use our rubber spatula to scrape out the rest of that. We went to that much work to make our burgers. We don't want to leave any behind in here. You want to make sure that this is going to hold together. So if you want to make more falafel sized balls, you can use a pre-portioned scoop like this, or you can just use your hands or a tablespoon. It's an easy way to scoop things up, keeps things neat. And yeah, I think this is actually a really nice texture. I'm really glad I didn't make flax eggs because I think it would be too moist and fall apart, but I think this would actually hold together nicely in cooking. So we'll make a few that are little, and then we can make a larger one as a burger size as well. And if your hands get really messy, you can, or the mixture starts sticking, you can get a little water on your hands and rub them off, let it drip, and then keep forming the balls or patties. And to save time and make it less messy, you can also just pre-portion scoop everything out and then flatten them all out. So, do one thing in each step. And if you're not sure what size to make, I'd encourage you, again, to make a test patty, cook it, taste it, see if the seasoning is what you want, and also if the texture is what you want. And if you notice it's a little bit too soft, then make smaller ones like what I'm doing right now. And the other thing that you can do is if you really want it to be larger, burger-sized rounds, then you can always flatten it out more. So the more surface area to inside ratio, the more area that's going to be touching the heat and cooking, the more crunchy and less of a soft texture you're going to have. Right. So I'll do a couple more small ones and we'll make some larger patties. And these will also firm up more when they cook because we do have those dry ingredients that will absorb liquid. So we have the oats and the flax. It will also be a lot firmer after it even just sat out either at room temperature or in the fridge for 30 to 60 minutes. It will be a lot firmer. So if yours is a little bit too soft, you just let it sit. If you use those types of moisture absorbing ingredients, it will get easier to work with. But we're pretty lucky that it's working very well this time. All right, I'm going to form some into larger patties, so just to make more of a burger. I think these make really fun sliders too. So, you know, small burgers are a nice size. You're doing, so there's more of a, you know, medium size one. I'll make a larger one. So we have a few different sizes to cook. Again, if you're making these really large ones, make sure to flatten them out. And then if you go to grill veggie burgers, one trick to making them, you know, stick together on the grill is, you know, like we were being fussy and messing with this when we were sauteing to get that extra moisture to evaporate. You want to make sure to leave it in place without flipping or moving it on the grill until you get good, solid sear grill marks, you know, that the side that's down on the grill has cooked. And then when you go to flip it over, it should flip well. If you notice it's starting to stick, then just leave it there a little bit longer and try again in a few minutes. Make, you know, assuming that your heat isn't so high it's going to burn it, then it will usually release a little bit later. You're just trying to flip it too soon. Okay, and I have, I guess, another little one. So we have a few different burger sizes and some more falafel type balls here. We have the falafel size balls here, which I'll just flatten out a little bit. And if your fingers stick, then you can just moisten your fingers with a little bit of water and then it will make it so your fingers don't stick. And just make sure you don't add too much water, just shake off any moisture that you have on your hands there, but just that little bit of water on your hands will help prevent it from sticking. And if you want it to be, you know, round falafel balls, then you would just take these and, you know, roll them like Play-Doh, roll them into a ball. And typically if you're making them more like falafel balls, you might think, oh, are you going to fry them? I mean, you can fry them. They're delicious that way, but I like making the patties and then cooking them either in a nonstick pan with just a small amount of oil, or if you don't want oil, baking them in the oven. But, you know, whatever way you think they taste better is the right way to do it. So it's pretty flexible, this recipe. So I'll leave those ones. I'll make 3 round and the rest flat. And then we'll saute a couple of these just because that's a quick way to cook these so you can see what they look like. And if you wanted to bake them in the oven, then I would put them at 375 in the oven. And then you just want to get them so they have a nice, you know, crust on the outside. There's no ingredient that you need to get up to a certain temperature to be safe because, you know, we started out with raw ingredients, we sauteed them, they haven't been sitting out for very long. So all of this is, you know, safe to eat at any temperature. You're just really aiming for the texture that you want. So we have a nonstick skillet here ready to put a little bit of olive oil in. I would encourage you not to use nonstick spray. You know, you can use a small amount of oil, or if you don't want to use any and you have a good nonstick pan, that's good too. But if you spray nonstick spray, it actually gets to its smoke point quickly and it will actually make a very sticky coating on your pan. So it actually ruins your nonstick pan. So better to just avoid that. And I made a few different size patties, so we'll go ahead and cook the burger size ones and a few of the smaller ones. So I tend to make sure to set it in a little bit, you know, if I'm using a little bit of oil, set it in a little oil and move it off to the side of the pan without, just so you get a little bit of that richness from the oil on all of them. And you can tell that there's not a lot of residual moisture in here. It's not spattering or splattering because there's not any water really in the patty that's remaining. They're pretty dry. Not dry in an unpleasant way, but, you know, dry the way we want them so they don't fall apart. All right, then we'll do a few that are more the little patty size. And you want to kind of roll the balls around a little bit if they're in the ball shape, and then you just want to get a nice even browning. I like a little bit of a crisp crust because I like that texture, but you're just really aiming to get them to whatever point is a pleasant texture for you, and that can vary based on, you know, different people's preferences. And if you wanted to cook them in the oven and you wondered how long to cook them for, again, it's really just until you achieve the right texture. You might try at 375 about 10 to 15 minutes on one side, flip over, and then, you know, it might take 5 to 10 minutes more would be on average for some of these smaller burger size, and it might be a little bit longer if you have more moisture in yours, or you know, or yours are a different size than what I have here. For the falafel ball size, it will be quite a bit quicker. You can cook it for about half that amount of time. So let's go ahead and cook all of them. We're coming back here and you can see that they're getting some darker spots on there, and that's really the color that you're aiming for. I like to press them down a little bit, it just helps firm them up. Don't press them down too hard on the grill. You don't want to press them through the grates if you're cooking them that way. If your pan's hot and you feel like it browns very quickly, then pressing it down to make it a little thinner so you get more crispiness on the outside and the middle gets heated through is a good idea as well. And so as I mentioned before, I'm going to go ahead and turn down the heat. So if you wanted these to have a more meaty flavor, then you can take that mixture of a little bit of Worcestershire. I'm using the plant-based Worcestershire and a little bit of liquid smoke. You just brush it on, and it also gives it a little deeper brown color. It's really pretty. It makes it look juicy too. So if you're someone that's going to be taking some Instagram-worthy pictures, some food photography, it gives it that nice, juicy look as well. So we'll go ahead and get some of these plated and take a really nice photograph of it with all the beautiful toppings. And I hope you enjoy veggie burgers made however you like them at home.